spoken about some very interesting research around domestic violence
Mm.
that goes contrary to accepted thinking. Can you
Yeah,
can
that's
you
to put it
tell us a little
lightly.
bit about that? To put it mildly, I'm trying to be euphemistically talk
Yeah,
about it there.
being very diplomatic.
Yeah.
So domestic violence until about 50 years ago was seen as something that was behind closed doors, a private matter. It wasn't a criminal issue. Police sort of looked the other way until like the early 70s when someone called Erin Pitsey opened the first abuse refuge in the world in London, not far from me actually, called Chiswick Women's Aid. So that was the first time in the world where a space had been set up to bring women and children into the space to protect them from violent men, abusive relationships. So that was 50 years, 52 or 53 years ago, which is comparatively not long ago at all, considering domestic violence has existed for as long as human beings have existed. And from that point on, the movement itself was actually essentially hijacked. Erin, who opened the first refuge, actually polled the women that came to her. So women that were vulnerable, she polled them, and of the first 100 women in, she found that 60 of them were at least as violent as the men they left. So she discovered that it was not something that men were doing exclusively to women. It was better described as a cycle of violence where both women and men are feeding into it. And with that in mind, she tried to open up a shelter for men and boys, just like women and girls. And then that's sort of where she stopped being a national treasure, stopped being this hero of gender equality. And she was torn down. And she eventually was getting death threats and bomb threats and had a police escort. And then eventually left the country altogether. And she is now a shadow of the domestic violence industry. But the lessons she's taught still are still there if you look for them. And that is that domestic violence is not fundamentally a gendered issue. Second, there's a huge part of domestic violence is bilateral. So half of domestically violent relationships are bilaterally violent, meaning, like I said, both partners feeding into it. And then the third thing is that it's a multiplicity of causes. So there's more than one cause of domestic violence. The domestic violence industry is based on the idea that domestic violence is men's patriarchal need to control women. And that is power and control is certainly a part of the problem, but only one part of the problem. And it's also part for women as well. So women also, abusive women are also motivated by the same things. So not a gendered issue, a multiplicity of causes, and a large part of it's bilateral or reciprocal abuse. So I suppose in general, those are the three things I would say single me out as not particularly popular in this space. Although those are all scientifically valid, proven things, and I'm more than happy to send you any number of citations for that.
Yeah, I mean, your position is supported by research and evidence.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And not poor research, like really great research. Like those three things, I plagiarized. I'll be honest with you, I plagiarized those three things. They're from Professor Murray Strauss. Those are the three things he talks about that are missing from domestic violence research and academia and advocacy. And he founded the field of family violence research itself. So he's no longer with us either. And he founded the field. He set up. He created the models which we still use today to study violence. The tools we use now were made by him, and the field itself was created by him. And he went on and wrote like dozens of books and papers and studies. And those three things: bilateral abuse, multiplicity of causes, non-gendered issue. Well, that was like his sort of calling card. But now I've stolen it. Sorry, Murray. But he's making good points. So my point is that the research not only exists but it exists at a gold standard, like huge surveys. Like Murray Strauss himself took 200 surveys and studies, compiled them together, and then presented them all and said, these studies show that it is not a gendered issue. And it's not just him, there's plenty more researchers just like him, just as good, that's saying the exact same thing that are just widely ignored because what they're saying, although true, is just very unpopular.
what happened to Murray Strauss in terms of was he cancelled? Was he expelled from?
Yeah, death threats, more death threats. He received a very prestigious award. He was the president of some sort of sociological society in America, and he was winning like a lifetime achievement award. And the first two rows of people stood up and protested and all left. It's just like that's the sort of thing. And then obviously he did get death threats. Him, so he was part of like a threesome of researchers: Murray Strauss, Richard Yellis, Susan Steinmetz, all leading the way in the early 70s and 80s in terms of research. All of them found that it's not gendered issue. All found that men are abused in significant numbers, and all of them received death threats. Susan got the worst. In fact, she had a bomb threat phoned into her daughter's wedding at one point because of she wrote the first book on battered men, and she quit. she just stopped her research altogether at that point, and I totally get that. But yeah, like there's a huge amount of animosity towards any researcher in domestic violence that dares to say anything about the significant number of male victims of abuse.
Well, the intimidation obviously worked. Where
Which
was the
is,
intimidation coming from, George? Like who,
I
what
mean,
group?
Erin, who I've spoken to personally a few times, would say it's the feminist movement. But I mean, it's difficult to know because it's like that's the anonymously called in, but
Hmm.
she certainly got a lot of hostility. All of them did in feminist spaces because they were basically obsessed with this idea of patriarchy and patriarchy being the one single cause of domestic violence. And they really made domestic violence became the sort of poster child of the patriarchy, and that became the thing that they were really beating the drum on. And it turned out not to be true, or not the complete truth. So you can understand why certain people have that are motivated financially as well to stop these people from talking. And it's ironic because they were doing research on violent women. I feel like the fact that they got bomb threats from women is so
Yeah,
ironic. It's like you're not really disproving them, are you, by sending them a bomb threat?
yeah.
It's really counterintuitive, in my opinion, women are victims. And I'm like, no, women are strong, autonomous, courageous human beings and adults, and they're not children.
And once
So
you
yeah,
characterize them as victims, you take away their agency. Hello, everyone. If you enjoyed that short clip, the full extended version should be right about down here, and the subscribe button should be over here. So don't forget to go ahead and click. Thank you.